Welcome to the Optimize Podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize Podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on bidding, business development, proposal management, and work-winning strategy. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and perspectives to every episode. We're excited to welcome Matt Light as the host of this series. With 15 years experience across every bidding role, from bid writer to bid director, Matt has built and led high-performing commercial teams, shaping work-winning strategies for healthcare and logistics businesses across the UK and Europe, and delivering an 80% plus win rate in public and private sector bids. An active member of APMP UK chapter, Deputy CEO, 40 Under 40 awardee, and one of the inaugural cohort of the Leadership Academy, Matt is committed to using his spare time to elevate the bidding profession, helping reframe it as a high-value strategic discipline, recognised for supporting organisations to unlock commercial value and growth. Now he's bringing that experience to the podcast, exploring the people, strategies and ideas shaping the future of bidding, and how organisations can turn work winning into true strategic advantage. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you're listening. Now, let's hear from Matt.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Optimize podcast brought to you by VisibleThread. This is Series 5. I'm Matt Light, and today we're going to be talking all about the UK Procurement Act. And what better person could we have to talk about that with us today? It's the director of Gemma Waring Consulting, fantastic background in public sector procurement and bidding, having worked at Millstream Practice, a qualified trainer in this area, and an all-round public sector tendering expert. It's Gemma Waring. Hi, Gemma. How are you?
Hi, Matt. I'm really good. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction.
They're very warranted, very warranted. Thanks for being with us. Really looking forward to this discussion today. I think by the time this podcast goes out, we're probably going to have stopped talking about the Procurement Act being 1 year on by that point, because it's probably going to be about 18 months. But I'm really looking forward to getting your insights and views here on where we are in the UK with the Act and what the opportunities are with it going forward.
Yeah.
I think just before we get into that, just as a bit of a scene setter, mentioned there that you've got a really strong background in account management, consultancy, qualified trainer. So you bring all of that into your current work and your bid consultancy and procurement consultancy. How did all of those previous roles and the skills that you picked up within those shape your approach to bidding and procurement as it is today?
Wow, that's I think it's quite interesting because like many people, it wasn't a chosen career path. Didn't know what it was until I stumbled across it. And I think that if you go right back to the roots of what I've done throughout my career, my first ever role was a graduate buyer, but in a retail environment. And I actually was very fortunate. It was a department store, and I was responsible for purchasing toys, sweets, and luxury gifts.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a pretty dream job for somebody straight out of university. So I pretty much was in the buyer's role. So I had salespeople coming in. I got to play with toys. I got to try sweets. So I saw sales from that side. So being the buyer, instantly kind of knowing what put me off when people were trying to sell to me is probably more important than the sort of positive side. And then over time, I went into sales management, which was then the other side of the table, but very much in a business-to-business environment. I was fortunate. It was a football club when they were playing in the Premier League, so it was a very sort of glamorous job. It was a lot of fun to do that, but it was very hardline business-to-business sales. It was back in the days before GDPR, so it was here's a phone book, start calling people.
Right.
It was one of the very 100 calls a day, that sort of thing. So again, just learning how to get people on side, I think, understanding how to get people to want to speak to you. And I know that when we're looking at the Procurement Act, we'll talk about pre-market engagement and the new impact that has. And I think that was something I learned very quickly in that role, was how to engage people and how to give them a reason to want to speak to me, rather than just pushing a sales message. And I think that has really helped. But then just sort of, I've always been a fan of long-term career development and continual learning, just even if it's not work related. I'm currently doing a little history course on the side when I get a spare minute, because I just like learning stuff. I always have. But then learning how to train effectively. I've also got a coaching qualification, and just really getting underneath the sort of skin of what keeps people engaged, what motivates them. And it's that change of focus for me that I've brought to it. Is it's less about what I'm trying to achieve and more about how I can get people to come with me on that journey and get what I need at the end of it, rather than sort of practical management of things, if that makes sense. More about people management than practical project management. I think I would say my combined expertise has got me to the point of understanding.
Nice. And yeah, I see that as a natural journey, actually, that a lot of bid people go through, but maybe struggle to adapt to. So I can see how the skills and previous roles that you've had have definitely helped with that. So you're in a nice sweet spot there in terms of the expertise and experience that you've got. So look, let's dive straight into that then, because I want to talk about the Procurement Act with you, as we've said. You've been really sort of heavily involved in understanding the Act and its impact in the UK, pretty much ever since it was first announced by the UK government, back sort of 3-4 years ago. If I can take you back to that time when kind of those first announcements and consultations started to come out, what was your first impression about the whole thing? How did it land with you, and how have those impressions changed over time?
I think it's important to kind of think back that, when the white paper and the green paper were out, when it was just sort of in its very early legislative days, we were in a very unique period of time. We had the pandemic, we had lockdown, there was lots of stuff going on at that time. And I think society has changed a huge amount in that period as well, sort of politically and civilly. So if we think back to then, and what was happening, and I think as well, there were quite a few notable, I would say, cases of procurement not being done amazingly well by the public sector. And I think that when the first sort of drafts of it, the ideas of it started to come out, I had two things that stood out for me. Originally was, I thought, is this just trying to deregulate procurement? It seemed like a lot of the stuff that they were talking about was about more flexibility, more commerciality, less red tape. And I thought, is this a move towards deregulation? Again, the sort of political era at the time was very much around, just getting on with things and, maybe not following political processes as strictly as some other governments have done. So it seemed that was kind of my initial reaction. And I think, like a lot of people, I was also very surprised about the lack of mention around social value, sustainability, innovation. There was even, I remember, not a protest, a petition that was signed to say, why aren't you sort of doing this? Now, those things have changed quite dramatically from those initial impressions, because obviously to get through the legislative process and to get, it wasn't an easy process. It goes through the House of Lords, it goes through the House of Commons, it gets amendments, the amendments have to be agreed. It was a whole process. So a lot of the stuff that initially looked quite sizable in terms of change were sort of metered down by needing to be signed off by everybody. So things like the competitive flexible procedure still has certain rules and parameters around it. The approach to directly awarding contracts didn't really change that much. That was a bit of a concern at first. And again, then we've had the invent of the National Procurement Policy Statement, which is as a sort of, I really agree with the approach that they've brought in there. So, stop me if I'm going too much off on a segue, but what they basically have done is, rather than hard baking social value and sustainability requirements into the legislation, they've created the policy statement, which is ancillary to that. The actual legislation itself just says that authorities must have regard to it, but the actual policy itself can change over time. So it means that government can then keep more up to date with changes in the social value and sustainability arena, rather than having it wedded in a document that then has to go through a huge legislative process every time you want to change and update it. So I actually think that the way that they've managed that is really good.
Yeah, like you say, that flexibility seems to be a positive, doesn't it, in how it's kind of coming through at the moment. So, look, we all know that there were a lot of discussions about it, a lot of consultation. In typical UK fashion, it took its time to get there and get implemented. As I said, we are that beyond 12 months on now, probably sort of more 18 months by the time people are listening to this. So without dwelling on the timescale too much, do you think the implementation of the Act now has matched that initial ambition that was had during the consultation period for what it's been, or what it aimed to do?
I think so. Certainly, because my experience now is that I also manage and support procurement customers. So for the last sort of 6 years, have done both sides of the table. So got quite a unique perspective into, behind the scenes, all behind the smoke and mirrors of what's going on. And I think that in terms of the practical changes, what you usually will have in an authority is that you will have some very dedicated and knowledgeable procurement officers, or whatever their role title is, and in terms of them understanding the changes, knowing what they need to do, updating their documents and processes to reflect the new rules, I think the vast majority of customers I speak to are fine with that. The bigger challenge of the rollout is the cultural changes that are attached to some of the changes in the Act for authorities. So things like pre-market engagement, and that adding to the procurement timeline, and then thinking about how that will be managed and who will do it. And quite a big challenge is also the other side of it, which is the enhanced scrutiny of the contract management. So it's almost like the bookends either side of the procurement, because you can run a compliant procurement, and then it gets handed over to operational colleagues to manage the contract. And they're now having to understand that, this is now a public Procurement Act contract. I've now got to do this if I want to make any modifications to it. It's a different set of steps to go through than if it was pre-Procurement Act. And those operational colleagues aren't procurement experts, and they're experts in getting the job done. So that I've done a lot of work, contract management training as well within authorities to support them to be able to come with the procurement teams on the journey.
That's really good. I think sometimes it's easy for us in the bidding roles to forget the impact that this is going to have had on procurement teams. And I know sometimes we do like to have a bit of a moan, and sometimes it's rightly placed. But I think we do perhaps need to have more of an acknowledgement and understanding of what our procurement colleagues on the other side of the fence are going through. So that's a really good call out.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper now, and we're going to focus really on kind of three key areas. We're going to talk a little bit more about the similarities and differences in how the Act's landed between buyers and sellers and
Mhm.
suppliers. We're going to talk about some of the things that you've already mentioned and maybe kind of deep dive into some of the market engagement piece and competitive flexible procedure as well. And
Yeah.
then round off with getting just some more of your wonderful insights and practical advice for bidders. So you've already alluded to it there, Gemma, in terms of the work that you've done with procurement teams around understanding and implementing the Act. Obviously, you've done that work with bidding teams as well.
Mhm.
Who, not to put you on the spot, who would you say has had the steeper learning curve in understanding and implementing the Act so far?
Ooh, I would say that it's sort of gone in two waves. So I think initially it was the procurement teams, because they had to understand it all in depth. They obviously have, the legal concerns about getting things wrong and, making sure everything's right, updating documents, training. All of that sort of stuff that I've mentioned, but then, and in the early days, because obviously the Act it was supposed to come in a long time before it did, and then we had the change in government which delayed it. So this has been a couple of years of progress towards the point we're at now. And what I was initially hearing from a lot of suppliers was, "We'll just deal with it when it happens." There was almost this kind of like, we just have to do whatever they tell us to do in the bid. So we'll just do it. I work with customers from on the bidding side. I've got sort of blue chip customers. I've got sort of, still sole owned sort of SME type of businesses as well. So I work across the board. And I think that after the initial wave of procurement teams understanding it, as we've started to see the tenders and the changes hitting the marketplace, then suppliers have had to sort of do a little bit of catch up, but I don't think as in depth, because we don't, as on the supplier side, we don't need to know the ins and outs of. We assume that the procurement teams have done the rules and
Yeah.
the everything. We just look at what we get and say, okay, well, we'll just follow the steps then and complete the bid or go through the process they've outlined. I think that on the supplier side, one of the big challenges that I've had to help quite a lot of my customers with is the new approach to the selection stage and the supplier registration. And then I've seen all different varieties of how buyers have put tenders out now with that new selection stage, and
Yeah.
what I'm sure you have as well, Matt, in the ones that you've seen, and anybody listening will as well. So, and again, that kind of shows that although I do think the public sector are largely in the right place when it comes to implementing this, because it's such a fragmented space. There is no single entity in the public sector. Everyone operates sort of independently. There is a gulf between people that are 100% got it and everything's right, and then you've got people that are still playing catch up. And you also see people changing roles as well. So you've got
Right.
procurement teams where somebody's left in the last year, somebody's come in, they're having to learn it all. So you have all that going on, so that there is a huge variety. But definitely that selection stage and the new approach to it, I think, has thrown and confused quite a lot of people. And I've said for quite a while from the beginning that I do continue and have always been worried that it would be a barrier to entry for a lot of smaller suppliers, because it's taken something that was admin heavy, but simple and turned it into something that is maybe one step too far for people that want to get involved in bidding but can't face the rigmarole of it all. So I worry about the impact on newer or smaller suppliers.
Yeah, the piece on small and medium suppliers is quite interesting, Gemma, isn't it? Because one of the
Yeah.
big provisions in the Act was essentially meant to make it easier for SMEs to bid and actually be able to bid better. So you've alluded to it a little bit there. Just give us a little bit more of a flavour on that. Have you actually seen that happening? Do you see more SMEs now actually being active because of the new regs, or are there still challenges to that?
There are still challenges to that, and in all fair, to be fair to both sides, I can see it's such a big challenge. Even from when the PCR 15 that came in to try and support more SMEs to get involved in public procurement. We've had spending targets in place before as well. And I sort of I haven't seen it make a huge impact yet. In terms of, we've made it easier for SMEs, but hopefully over time, because, things like the National Procurement Policy Statement talks about supply chain diversity. There's more insistence on and future publication on 30-day payment terms and things like that, and pushing on to larger suppliers. The requirement, for their supply chains to be run in the same way. So I am hopeful as ever, and I know that part of with the release of the NPPS, there was the new PPNs came out, and they gave some mandatory requirements for central authorities. And what I think would be useful is to get a bit more clarity at a lower level. So there was the secondary consultation that was run last year, which was trying to fix this problem, essentially. It was asking the marketplace to consult with government and explain what they think would benefit. And, looking at the results of that, it's all the same stuff that we've been talking about for years. It's enhanced social value through procurement, it's supporting SMEs, and I just think it's such a huge challenge that it's something that we'll just have to keep chipping away at and keep on the agenda. I don't think there's a magic bullet that will suddenly get. I call them can't bid, won't bids. So I get a lot of customers that come up to me and they're just like, we want to bid on this opportunity. We've got no idea what we're doing. We don't want to learn about it. Just fix it for us. That's some of the work that I get. But then hopefully they see the value in it. Because I always try and say, well, if you're an SME, you've got a customer there that's a long-term contract. It's 30-day payment terms. It can be the lifeblood of your business to get a couple of solid contracts in that will help you then to trade and grow. But yeah, I haven't seen a major uplift in my experience. And as I said, I think that if anything, that new selection stage has made things a little bit more confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, Gemma, because I'm in an SME currently, and I think one of the it has made it slightly easier to bid from my perspective, and I guess I'm lucky with the experience I've got. But one of the big things that it's impacted on in our organisation is the operational side of things. And I would imagine it's the same for others. You've now got to think about, I might need an ISO certification, or I might need a Cyber Essentials certification, which maybe as an SME in the past you may not have realistically needed to think about. So it's like you say, definitely positives but challenges as well. I think from what we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there are some provisions in the Act, for example, in the competitive flexible procedure, it does specifically state that if justified, suppliers could be treated differently, as long as it doesn't give them an unfair advantage or disadvantage, which is very difficult to try and think how you would manage that practically. But, there are measures in there, and again, with the pre-engagement, it talks about building capacity in the supply chain as part of the pre-market engagement. So there are tools in there to try and support buyers to do more work in that area, and things like allowing equivalencies or recognizing that the difference, say if you were a social enterprise, and you were going to compete against a private sector large company or something, trying to recognize that difference. But culturally, I just think a lot of the public sector is so risk averse that things like that are great and they sound great and they make a big splash in terms of look at the changes. But practically, are procurement teams going to run a competition and treat people differently? Probably not.
Yeah. There's a whole can of worms there, isn't there? We don't think we want to open.
Yeah.
So just last one on this piece, Gemma. We talked already about perhaps some of the tensions in the past that might have existed between procurement teams and bidding teams. Do you think that the provisions of the Act have maybe helped improve bidding's understanding of procurement and procurement's understanding of bidding, or do you think maybe we're not quite there yet? And what would be your reason for where you land on that?
Yeah, I think that the new measures around the pre-market engagement are designed for that. So for the first time ever, Section 16 of the Act, for people that want to look it up, but it very explicitly states in there that what buyers are allowed to engage the market and experts about, and it is so broad. It even says writing the tender documents, designing the award criteria. It's got a list of things that you're allowed to engage with buyers about. And that, again, is to try and make it more attractive for buyers, because there's always been that push-pull of wanting to engage, but then being scared of challenge from the buyer's side, and then from the supplier's side, you want to engage, but you don't want to give away everything because you don't want to see it in the bid. And it's always just, again, one of those sort of it's like a game of poker, isn't it? It's everyone's playing the same game, but from very wary positions. But the Act is, again, trying to make sure that we go that procurement teams go to market with something that is fit for purpose. It's and that's what I do applaud it for, is that it's saying don't just run a compliant procurement, actually get the contract at the end of it that is useful and provides value and is good. And I've seen a lot of examples of it. There was a huge amount of, if you looked on the Find a Tender platform now, the pre-market engagement notices are there in the thousands probably now. You've got the preliminary market engagement, you've got the planned procurement notices as well are there. You've also got the pipeline notices coming out as well from authorities that have given you advance notice. So all of that is an encouragement to start that engagement early to help break down those walls. But again, I think the same as we said with the SMEs, that's always been a challenge in procurement. And I think that, again, I know that you've worked for a lot of different types of organisations, Matt, and it depends on the skill set and the capacity of the organisation. My first real bidding job was for Reed in Partnership, and I was doing sort of the bigger welfare to work contract bids, and they were huge. They were like 3-month endeavours with like 40 team members and stuff. And there were people there, we had the resources, people had been out, they'd been talking to people before it came out. But then you look at sort of a smaller local training provider who also wants to bid on that and would provide that value. They don't necessarily have the time, the resources, the understanding to go out and do that. So I think that it's great having those measures in place. And I think they're a great benefit to people who know the game and know how to play it. But I think that it's how do you spread that message a bit further then? How do you get that message out so that newer organisations can see that and do that meaningful engagement to help try and diversify the supply chain a bit more?
Yeah, it's one of the really big changes in the Act, isn't it, Jem? The pre-market engagement piece, and you've talked about perhaps a lot of the sort of theory behind it there. Could you, maybe without naming names, have you got any sort of specific examples of actually where you've seen the pre-market engagement done really well? And if so, what does that look like? And are there any sort of insights in there that for procurement people listening, you would say that's something that they could mirror in their own pre-market engagement situations?
I think that the biggest thing for me, and I always talk about this, I fly the flag for suppliers when I do my procurement training, is for the pre-engagement to be meaningful. Because potentially the issue with, because under the new rules, any above threshold contract should really be doing pre-market engagement, and before it goes out with the tender notice to start the tendering competition, they should have published a PME notice to say what engagement has taken place. Now, the only challenge with that is if it just becomes a tick box exercise. We'll run a half-hour webinar where we just basically tell you everything you're going to read in the procurement documents, and we've already decided everything is not pre-market engagement, although a lot of people think it is. So a really good example that I saw, where I was helping a customer bid for a framework to provide care services. So it was sort of ad hoc placements for people with complex needs, young people with complex needs. So very detailed, really important in terms of getting it right, because obviously it's affecting vulnerable people at the end of the exchange. And what the authority did is they initially engaged. They said, this is our proposed approach. This is the lotting structure. This is the fee structure. This is how we imagine it will all work from a sort of end-to-end operational handover, hand back. And then they followed that up with a very targeted set of questions that suppliers could respond to anonymously.
Okay.
And they then ran a secondary engagement webinar to say, right, now we've collated all your feedback. We want you to know that specifically we've changed A, B, and C. So they were able to show that they had listened, they'd evaluated the feedback they'd got, and they changed the lotting structure, and then they changed some of the ancillary services that they put in as mandatory, because not everyone could offer them and it would exclude people. And so they did. So that to me is what pre-market engagement is.
Oh.
And yeah, whereas, like I said, a lot of people unfortunately still think it's just, half-hour webinar. This is what we're doing anyway. Bits out next week. See you later.
Yeah, and without naming names, it's surprising how many of the, shall we say, larger procurement organisations still take that view.
Yes, definitely.
So, is there anything that we can do from a bidding side, Gemma, to help procurement teams with pre-market engagement? Is there anything that we can do that might help ease the process for them a little?
Yeah. I think I'm very wary about talking on behalf of all procurement. I'm sort of looking at my experience and what I've seen and what I know, and also what I know from being a supplier on the other side. And for me, the thing with pre-market engagement, if you want to do more than just turn up and show your face at one of these sort of staged events, which again, there's measuring that, sort of getting to know people, sort of them seeing your name and your interest, is that in my experience, generally procurement teams do not have the time or the resources to engage with you just for the love of it.
Right.
If they and that's not because they don't care. It's because they are usually overstretched, under-resourced, firefighting themselves. It's really uncanny when you actually look at the two different working cultures between bidding and procurement and how similar they actually are. You've got something that's like a routine process that should be easy to follow, but you've got so many stakeholders involved and time pressures, and it's very, very similar working cultures on both sides. And also on the procurement side, people fall into it in the same way we fall into bidding. There isn't sort of a career day usually for join public sector procurement. Same way you don't really get ones for bidding, although I would love for there to be more bidding focused ones. But basically, I've kind of lost the thread of what I was saying there.
No, you're all right.
What was the original question?
It was about
my ADHD brain.
No, you're okay. It was about what bidders can do to help pre-market engagement be successful.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
So for me, I think that because procurement teams are so overstretched and don't have the time that and a lot of them wish they had that time. A lot of them say, I wish I could do this. And they get frustrated when they end up with the same contractor because, they haven't had time to do what they want to do and all the best practice. And for me, it's always about giving them a reason to talk to you. This kind of comes back to maybe my earlier skills of making 100 phone calls and trying to get someone on the hook. And, if they think you can offer them something that is different to what they already know, or enhances, or maybe is something they might miss out on. Sometimes when I'm training on this, I call it like the FOMO point.
Right.
Then they might go, oh, well, I'll speak to them. Because if you're just saying, I'm bidding on this next month and I just wanted to call you and have a chat with you about it. They don't have time for that. But if you said, we've got a new approach to this, or we've got a new product, or we've just patented a new technology that will do X, Y, and Z, then suddenly they might go, okay. And an example of this was when I was working back for Millstream before it was bought out by Proactis. They run Public Contracts Scotland and sell to Wales. And another national portal was up for tender, and we wanted to go for it. And I tried to get to speak to the procurement team, no interest. And this was way back in time when the last legislation came out and people were talking about a single European selection stage, and we developed the module which is now being used in Public Contracts Scotland to manage the selection stage. And I sent an email and I said, I know you're really busy, but I just wanted to let you know that we've developed this module, it's ready to go, and I just wanted to give you a demo of it because I'm sure you'd want that included in your new platform to future-proof it. And then suddenly I had a meeting. So that's what I would say to people is when you're thinking about pre-engagement, yes, there is the personal aspect of it, but practically, if you want to use it to stand out, to get a one-to-one, to, really push your name and your brand forward, try and think about something like that. Why speak to you? They're not just going to do it to say hi. They'll do it if they think that you can offer them something.
No, that's brilliant insight, Gemma. Thank you. And I always knew that I really liked the Scotland portal as well, by the way.
Yes, it would be good to have an English one. It was as
Certainly
easy.
So one of the other areas that you've already talked a little bit about so far is the competitive flexible procedure. And this is another really big change and actually quite a talked about one as well.
Mhm.
For those of us who may not have encountered it yet or seen a procurement that uses it, myself included, can you guide us through what does competitive flexible procedure really mean, and what are
Yeah.
what are the opportunities there? Why would buyers use it, and why is it so good for them and bidders?
Yeah. So under the new Procurement Act, there are only two competitive procedure choices. So most people are used to the open or restricted procedure. There were also other ones, competitive dialogue and negotiated procedures. But what the Act has essentially done is it's cut that down to two. So you've got the open procedure, which is just as it was, single stage. You get asked all your selection plus your ITT and your pricing information all at once. You respond all in one go. The only caveat over that is that what a lot of buyers used to do is they would do that, but then maybe do a presentation or enhanced due diligence. Under the Act, strictly, they're not allowed to do that. I know a lot of authorities are still doing that and calling it an open procedure, but they're not meant to, because it's just supposed to be a very quick, everything all in one go, nothing additional. So that then means that because we've lost all of these other procedure options that we used to have, everything else is now bundled into the competitive flexible procedure. And
Okay.
essentially that means that the buyer, the procurement team can design whatever procurement procedure they think is suitable to get the results that they need in that procurement. So that could include negotiations, dialogue, rounds of tendering. Interestingly, for the public sector, that can also include pricing negotiations.
Oh,
And they're allowed to include a BAFO stage, best and final offer stage, for people that aren't used to dealing with that. And that, for me, is where there's that crossover between organisations that bid on both public and private sector will probably have an advantage here, because that's private sector skill base
um,
coming over into the public sector. And the reason that that's happened is because what the Act has also done is we used to have separate legislation for utilities, defence, concessions. It's all come together under one remit now. And what has essentially happened is the sort of tools and abilities that private utilities, say, used to have, which was all of that stuff anyway, has now had to be opened up to the wider public sector. So a private utilities company has always been able to, do negotiations, do BAFO stages, things like that. It's now open to the wider public sector. There are certain caveats around it. The buyers still have to have regard to the NPPS. They have to make sure that they haven't designed the procedure in a way that is restrictive or, is produces barriers for SMEs. And it was such a big splash item when the Act first came out,
yeah.
and everyone was super like, "Whoa, what is this?" And that's that deregulation theme. It was kind of just saying, do what you like, but it, in practice, it's not been quite as spectacularly groundbreaking as it might have been, although there are some good examples of good practice coming out now, which is good to see, but it hasn't created a whole scale change as of yet.
Ah, interesting. Okay. So it sounds like then bid teams have got a bit of an opportunity to gem themselves up on this
Uh-huh.
if their buyers that they are used to working with might use this procedure going forward. And you mentioned there bringing a little bit of sort of the private sector bidding approach into public sector. So what's your view if you were in a bid team and you were looking at a contract using competitive flexible procedure in the future? What could we be doing now, and what would we need to, or how would we need to adapt our processes to be successful in a competitive flexible procedure process?
Yeah. I think the number one thing for me is negotiation training. I think that there is actually, I believe, a significant investment going into that on the public sector side, because
Okay.
I think that's really the turnkey is when you get public sector bodies being more confident delivering, negotiation sessions, because again, they're the same as us. A lot of them, it's just been a paper-based exchange, and it's such a huge change. You've gone from the sort of almost blind auction of put your price in
Yeah.
and we'll score it, to now we're talking about negotiations, and I think that understanding sort of culturally what that means as well in terms of, and I tell procurement teams to be wary of this, is obviously if you put in a best and final offer stage into your competitive flexible procedure, how's that going to affect the initial pricing you get? Because people will leave room to do the negotiations, and are you adding a stage there where you will end up where you would have been anyway? It's all of that really needs to be considered. But definitely, I think negotiation, and also maybe just sort of just general dialogue and presentation sort of skills, because I think that if you think about your team structure and the skill base of it, if we are doing more pre-market engagement, who's best seated to do that? Is it an outbound sales team? Is it at director level? Is it somebody on the bid team? I'm sure you've worked with lots of people, as I have, Matt, who are the most amazing bid writers, but they sit in the corner with their headphones on, and they're the most wonderful, and I probably class myself as this quirky individuals.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. But are they the people that you want to go and do pre-market engagement? Are they the people that you want to sit in a negotiation or would feel comfortable doing that? So I think that it's a really good time now, while the buying side seem to be preparing themselves for it, to really assess your team. And if you do have the ability to do any sort of skills development or training, thinking about negotiation, business to business, sort of more that type of selling, and in terms of the dialogue and the conversations you'd need to have, because what you also want to do is use those opportunities to direct traffic. So as I said, the Act says you can pre-engage to set conditions of participation, to design the procedure, to set the award criteria. So what you don't want to do is waste an opportunity where you have managed to get pre-engagement with the buyer and then not influence any of that stuff for the actual tender itself. And it's totally different skills, I think, than maybe what we've got used to. And with virtual working as well, we're used to doing more stuff remotely, and that kind of, face-to-face negotiation round a table isn't something that a lot of people would feel desperately comfortable with, I would imagine. So yeah, I think now's the time to plan ahead for that.
I really hope that, I hope that people listening, hear everything, but I really hope people hear that, Gemma, because we talk a lot in the profession at the minute about how do we elevate ourselves and how do we become more strategic. I think everything that you've said there feeds exactly into that. And, the Procurement Act piece, if people can actually use that as the lever to get themselves access to more of these skills and the ability to train themselves in that, I think that's a really, really strong piece of advice. So thank you for sharing that. So look, let's round off by talking a little bit about future state. Here we are midway through 2026. If you and I were to come back and have a chat more towards the end of 2027, where do you think we'd find ourselves with public sector procurement? How do you see things evolving with the Act and with procurement in general over the next 12 to 18 months?
There's a few different things on the horizon. So I mentioned the consultation earlier on, and there hasn't been, although the sort of responses have been published, there hasn't been a plan put in place yet, or any specific, objectives or requirements. But that is trying to look at taking the social value model, which was released with the National Procurement Policy Statement. At the minute, that's only a requirement for central authorities like your Department of, your Department for, the Government Commercial Agency to follow. And what they're trying to do is embed something at a more local level that makes social value and sustainability easier to manage. So just for people that aren't aware, the social value model basically has aligned 8 specific asks to government policy, and buyers in central authority roles have to do 10% minimum of the evaluation to social value, and they have to select one or more of these 8 specific tasks. And they're things like around jobs, reducing crime, things like that. If you just search for procurement social value model, you'll be able to find it. And what they want to try and do is bring that down to a local level, which is obviously horrendously difficult. I don't envy anybody that's got the task of doing that. But again, it's trying to say, rather than every authority asking for something different, everyone's singing off the same hymn sheet. And the model even then says what good looks like. It says how it should be evaluated, and it says how it should be measured contractually as well. So I think that because the consultation, I think that came out in March, so it's been a few months since, coming up to a few months since that's come out when we're recording this. So I think that we'll see movement on that. So definitely, if you're a bidder that is, as most of us are, looking at NHS trusts, local authorities, those sorts of places, you'll probably see some change there to keep in step with. And what's good about it as well is if you do have these 8 asks, you can, what I'm seeing, I've been bidding with some larger organisations where we've had to put in bids that have said, please explain how you will respond to points 2 and 7 and what your plan is for it. And that means that as an organisation, you can actually then create structures rather than just responding to asks in individual tenders. You can actually create a bit more of a meaningful programme in that area and have an answer to that and a plan for that built into your operations, which is really helpful. So I would say definitely keep an eye on that. That will evolve over the next 12 months. And I think the other thing for me is I'll just have to try and remember the exact name of it, but it's basically the public interest test as to whether something should go out to procurement at all.
Okay.
So, yeah, which is very interesting. Again, I've been trying not to be too cynical, but basically the idea is that any contract valued of £1 million or above, there should be an interest test done to see whether it should be outsourced, because they're calling it a culture of outsourcing by default. So authorities just outsource everything because it's what they're used to doing. Whereas what they're saying is anything £1 million or above in contract value, they should actually decide whether they should be delivered in-house. The cynical side of me is, okay, so where are all these people that are going to be able to deliver these things? Because I know working with authorities, their resourcing and their budgets and their recruitment ability is limited with the funds that they have available. But there's that bubbling up in the background as well as and I know that there's been some quite just on the news this morning, actually, there was talk about the South West Water, and they were talking about bringing that back under public control. There's been stuff around the railways to do with that. And again, we're sort of under a Labour government at the moment where these things are more likely to happen. So I just wonder how far that will go in terms of an agenda and a requirement, and what impact that will have on the stuff that is actually going out to market. And like everything, well, like a lot of things in procurement, this seems to be counterproductive. It's sort of saying we want more people involved in the supply chain, we want to support British businesses and smaller businesses, and then on the other hand, we're looking at insourcing more stuff. So be interesting to see how that one plays out as well, but something to keep an eye on as well.
Definitely. And just to finally wrap up, Gemma, what's your level of confidence around the future of public sector procurement? Have you still got any concerns with the direction that we're going, or do you feel comfortable that despite some of the challenges in there, we've got a bright future in terms of how suppliers and buyers are going to work within the Procurement Act going forward?
In general, I think that it will get better. I just think it will take time. And I think that if you think about the last legislation, we're sort of 10 years of working with that. And I would say, arguably, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that would argue the opposite, but I think that did allow for a lot of progression. If you think about 10 years ago, if you think about what we look at now in procurement for, modern slavery, people paying their taxes properly, targets for spending with SMEs, there have been great changes, but it doesn't happen like a lightning bolt. It takes time. So what I would love to see is maybe if we get back on 10 years time, if we're both still working in bidding and procurement, but it would be nice to see, in the long term, that things like the social value model and maybe a localized version of it have really took a hold. It would be great to see more buyers having more open commercial discussions with the supply base, and see that positively impact the contracts that go to market and how they're managed practically. So yeah, I think that there are the bigger challenges that are almost, I don't want to say impossible to fix completely, but are ongoing. Like I said, the getting SMEs involved, making sure that people have got the right skills and capacity and, got the right resources to do what they need to do to manage the whole of the procurement exchange. They're sort of eternal. I think they're evergreen challenges that we have to keep chipping away at. But in general, I do think that it's moving to a better place.
Amazing. Positive note to end on as well.
Yeah.
Gemma. Thank you. Awesome. Before we completely wrap up, we like to end each of these podcasts with a little bit of rapid fire Q&A. Are you up for doing some of this?
Yeah, let's go for it. I'll try and keep my answers concise. Everybody knows I talk too much.
Fantastic. Okay, so first one, what's the most common question that you get asked by anybody about the Procurement Act?
Usually, it's usually competitive, flexible procedure on what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Fantastic. So, and the answer to that, well, you've heard it, but go back and listen to it again if you need to.
Yeah.
What's been your biggest personal learning experience in what you've done with understanding the Act over the past few years?
I think speaking to a broader range of authorities. So my experience in the public sector was central government, local government, NHS, housing associations. So I've been fortunate to be able to then work with like utilities companies, that are acting as public sector buyers, the defence sector as well. So it's been interesting to learn about their cultures because they are so different, and then that's helped me really understand those aspects of the Act of why has this stuff come in and where's this come from, and it is that knitting together of all the disparate parts of it into one set of legislation that has opened the doors for everybody else.
Fantastic. And last one, just if you can only share one piece of advice to bidders listening to strengthen their understanding of the Act, what would it be?
I would say look at your key customers, understand how they're planning to implement change and prepare for it. So they might be doing business as usual, running a restricted procedure and just calling it competitive, flexible procedure, and it's business as usual for you. But if you suddenly start getting hit with negotiations and this, that, and the other, this is your window of opportunity to be ready to manage those challenges when they come through.
Amazing. Gemma, thank you.
Thanks,
so
Matt.
much for us to think about and really absorb there. I think from my perspective, the key takeaways I've had there, we need to think about really how procurement are dealing with this from a bidding perspective, and maybe be a bit more open to that. Pre-market engagement and competitive flexible procedure, I feel like I understand so much better now. And particularly with the latter, certainly if I find any tenders on that in the future, I'm going to know how to handle those. And yeah, some really great information there on what we can do to be prepping ourselves as bid teams for the future of public sector procurement. So Gemma, really, really fantastic, and appreciate your time. Look, if there's any more information that people want to get off of the back of this, or they want to talk to you in any more detail, maybe consider some of your training in this area, where can they go to find you?
The best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I think I'm fairly well connected. You'll probably find, if you're listening to this podcast, I'll be connected to a connection of yours. So if you just search for Gemma Waring, I'm on there. And you can always just reach out by email. It's nice and easy. It's just gemma.waring@outlook.com. And I will happily reply to you if you've got any questions.
Amazing. Gemma, again, thank you ever so much. Really,
Thanks.
really appreciated this. And thank you, everybody, for listening. That's been the Optimise podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. I look forward to you joining us again next time. Bye.
You've been listening to the Optimise podcast from VisibleThread. A special thank you to our host, Matt Light, for bringing his experience and passion for the bidding profession to the series. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe wherever you're listening to stay up to date with future episodes and series from industry experts. Thanks for listening.